Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast. Are you ready for threat intelligence? Behind the scenes with FOR578. My name is Carol Oth, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Robert M. Lee and Mike Cloppert, co-authors of SANS' new FOR578 Cyber Threat Intelligence course. If during the webcast you have any questions for Robert or Mike, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface. We will be answering them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Robert.
Hey, thank you so much, Carol. Yeah, I always like it with the 4-5-7-8. It's nice and tongue twister for most people. So it's Forensics 4-5-7-8 here for the new threat intelligence class we have. We wanted to give you a sort of behind-the-scenes look, but also give you a very important understanding of, are you even ready for threat intelligence? Mike and I very much are passionate about the topic and obviously want students to come join us and share in the learning process, but there is a little bit of grain of truth there that we need to address, that it's not for everybody. There's no reason to have folks in the class that aren't going to get value out of the subject matter. So we want to be sure to highlight that in today's session, but also show you why you should come to the class and why threat intelligence is important. I always like starting off with a little bit of light comics. If those people that know me well know that I write a comic strip. So this comic here resonates very well with me with my previous government job about always sort of messing up attribution. And it's fun in a lighthearted manner to realize that, yes, when we look at attribution itself, and that's not the core component of threat intelligence, but it tends to be a component, that we go through processes of realizing time and time again that there's certain big players that are responsible for a lot of activity that we see. China, US, Russia, Iran, France, UK, these countries come up time and time again. So experience would drive that when we look at a campaign or look at some new intrusion, that there's a higher chance of it being those countries. But that's not what threat intel is all about. Threat intel is about taking that critical look, having that competing analysis, and really getting to the bottom of what's going on and trying to make better security, not just trying to jump to analytical conclusions just because they might have a higher chance of being accurate. So with that, let me do a quick introduction of us. First, Mike, you want to talk about yourself for a moment?
Sure, Robert. My name is Michael Cloppert. I am the Chief Research Analyst for Lockheed Martin's Computer Incident Response Team, where I've been for the past, I just had my 10-year anniversary, which I'll tell you what, they're like dog years. It feels more like 70 sometimes. But in any case, I'm the co-author for 4578 and the CTI Summit co-chair for the fourth year in a row. So if unfortunately we're sold out. But if you guys didn't get a chance to go in the past, I would encourage you to keep an eye out for 2017 and make it if you can. We always have a great time. We get a lot of great presenters, and Rick Holland and I, we always try to get the folks to talk that we want to hear talk, and it hopefully works out that everybody else wants to hear these folks too, and so far it has. So I won't go into any gory details on my background, other than I was a co-author of what's often referred to as, quote, that kill chain paper. So.
Yeah, and I'm the other Rob Lee at SANS. So most of you on the DFIR track will be fully aware of Rob Lee the first. So I'm the other one. I always like putting up the pictures in the slides because I consistently get emails from folks that are looking for him, and unfortunately with all the activity that's been going on recently with Ukraine, he's been getting a lot of emails for me. So I'm the one that has more hair, and he's the one that has all the talent. So my background was starting in the intelligence community as an Air Force officer, and working a lot of the same kind of stuff that Mike worked over at Lockheed. So it's very interesting to see how private sector and government sector mix back and forth at times, which is a good thing to talk about when it comes to threat intel. But most importantly, what is this thing, right? So there is a lot of communication out there about threat intelligence. And I think Mike added on this slide a very good political kind of statement of what we mean when we say threat intelligence. I'm a little bit more blunt when I say that there are good other definitions out there. There are good ways to approach this field. But I will go ahead, and I think Mike would back me up on this, I will go ahead and say that there's a lot of miscommunication in the field for sure. There is a significant portion of well-intentioned marketing statements, but they mislead if you refer to marketing statements as your sort of source of knowledge on a topic. And threat intelligence has gotten hotter and hotter over the years, but we need to focus on what cyber threat intelligence actually means to determine if we can derive value out of it, and ultimately to see how we can drive that change in our security organizations. As we'll talk about later, it's not a magical fix to anything. So it's very interesting to me that Mike and I both having authored this course, we generally start out the class with a good section, a good couple discussions on what threat intelligence is not, and trying to de-educate some of the misnomers and some of the miseducation that's taking place in the community. For instance, it's not a magical solution to all your security problems, as we'll talk about later. But what does it actually mean? Well, first off, we see here this threat aspect. The threat that I've shown up on the screen here, this definition that we're putting forth of the threat that others have put forth, like Idaho National Labs and the DoD, specifically looking at those capabilities or those adversaries that have the intent, opportunity, and capability, right? So if there is not all three of those components, you do not have a threat. And the question always comes up, great, so how do I know if something has those three components? And that requires a good bit of your own understanding of yourself. For example, opportunity, it can be a lot of things. It can be social engineering, it can be vulnerabilities on the network, it can be access paths and unauthenticated VPNs, but there's, in some cases, usually a technical and human component to opportunity. That requires you to know yourself. If you are trying to jump into cyber threat intelligence and you have no idea what is on your network, you have no idea what systems you have, what software you run, if you're not doing any of the critical controls from the top 20 critical controls over at SANS, you're not doing any of that stuff, and you want to jump into cyber threat intelligence, it's probably a little bit premature, because you're never going to have a really good understanding of what your threats are. So you need to have a good understanding of yourself, and then as you develop that, you'll be able to understand what capabilities are out there in the field, and this is where some of the more of the research goes into doing cyber threat intelligence, and start identifying what capabilities are out there, and then maybe what actors are using them. So a really good example, we have this Ukrainian incident going on right now where on December 23rd, a power outage occurred in Ukraine, and it's been so far stated that it's been attributed rather to a cyber attack. So SANS actually broke some of this, and we've been working with really good researchers in the community so far, a lot of good community analysis going on, showing that there was a sample of malware recovered from the power center's networks, this regional control center, that likely was involved in the attack. We don't know yet if it was the purpose or if it was the intent of the adversary to use this malware to cause the outage. We also don't know that the malware itself impacted the facility in this way. It just most likely was linked to the attack, maybe being used by the adversary to log in and do something. My point in highlighting this, though, is you have a piece of malware, which is that capability, but you still have that human actor. So just because we see, in this case, a sample of black energy pop up in the network, yeah, it's very likely that it's probably the actors that have used black energy before. But we can't make that analytical leap. We've got to realize that there's a hostile intent, or there's a human aspect of this. And that's where we really start diving in and trying to analyze the data, analyze the incident response data and context to try to determine what's going on. So I just want to highlight there, it's really about that human adversary. And when we talk about CTI or cyber threat intelligence, we really drive home that point of there is a human fingerprint left and the actions chosen, the actions done across intrusions and campaigns and these things that we'll talk about later. And that human fingerprint of that human adversary, that's really a focal point of cyber threat intelligence. Understanding that human threat, how it matches up against your environment, your defenses, your capabilities, and making sure that you take advantage of it. And I'm going to pass it off to Mike here in a second to talk about Intel, but the last thing I want to drive home here about that human threat is defense is doable. A lot of folks in the community have put forth, oh, these advanced persistent threats, and they're so amazing, and we just can't do anything, and defense is going to be hard, and oh my gosh, they've got nation-state level resources. How can I defend myself? You know your network, or should. It automatically puts you in a position of power. You understand your business operations, your systems, the configurations. Once you have all that information, adversaries are trying to get to that remotely and learn it, but you should already have it. More importantly, you have a lot of capability within your own environment to do things. And the key point, though, is it takes trained and empowered human analysts. Boxes on the network that flash and do things are good, right? It's great to have great tools to get us into a position to do better security. But at the end of the day, the only way to counter advanced, focused, persistent threats, that human adversary, the only way to counter those focused threats is with empowered and trained defenders. So it's really the analyst on analyst kind of discussion that we're going with here. Mike, I'll pass it off to you.
Thanks, Robert. I think one other thing I want to emphasize here is that when we say cyber threat intelligence, we're not just referring to the intelligence itself. This IP address or that adversary. We're talking about really a discipline, a field of study, a domain of knowledge that includes all of these interoperable and interdependent models, the kill chain being simply one that happens to sound really cool, I guess. Funny story, I didn't want to call it the kill chain, but my colleague Eric Hutchins insisted on it. I was afraid we wouldn't be able to get published in an academic journal because of having the word kill in the title of an academic paper. But sure enough, he was right and I was wrong. But in any case, we're talking about all of this, the approach, right? The methodology, the paradigm of leveraging, and really this isn't necessarily intelligence; it's more counterintelligence, because what we're doing is collecting information about how these adversaries operate against us, and trying to exploit that using our tools and capabilities and representing it with these various models so as to improve our defense. And this all came out of the model, the risk model, that is generally defined as the combination or the product of impact, right, vulnerability, and threat. And we have a lot of different information security subdisciplines dedicated to vulnerability, from pen testing to blue teaming and the SANS 20 critical controls, so on and so forth, to impact with incident response and all of that. But there was nothing really that was attempting to mitigate the threat component, and that's what we are doing here with cyber threat intelligence. And I mentioned information before. One of the things that we really emphasize in the class here is that there are different levels of information. There are different levels of abstraction in knowledge, right? And it starts with data from the operational environment. Robert said, I'm glad he did. You know your environment better than anyone else. You have a strategic advantage in that case. And when I go to support some clients and they learn more about their network, their operational environment, to use the military parlance, from their adversaries than they did from their sysadmins and network architects and engineers, what that says is that they were at a strategic disadvantage. So at least at a high level, you need to understand your operational environment, and from that you have all of these sensors, right? These things that generate these logs, these transactional logs, and that's effectively your data. That isn't intelligence, right? That's data. An IP address isn't intelligence, it's just data. And then once you process and exploit this, so I see maybe some activity that looks somewhat malicious or suspect. I'm going to go ahead and terminate the FTP session because it's gone over 10 gigabytes, or I'm going to throttle it, something like that. Once you have processed and exploited this, you have information. So this is the data with greater semantic meaning that describes one or a set of these pieces of data, and from that information you eventually develop intelligence through the process of analysis. And it's really that action that we focus on in the course. How do we analyze this information? How do we transform data into information, and then represent that information using the models and these principles and philosophies that generally align under cyber threat intelligence to form intelligence about our adversaries and inform strategic decision making for defending organizations.
Yeah, very, very well stated. And I'll pivot on that as well to say, when it comes to that information and intelligence piece, this is something that Mike had said in one of the first classes I sat in with him, when a very adept student had asked, well, why do we call it all cyber threat intelligence if really this is, counter intel? Really, we're dealing with data and information more than intelligence most of the time. And Mike's very blunt answer was, well, the horse is already out of the barn, right? We're not going to be able to change the community in the sense of saying, hey, there's data, information, and very little of what we actually see as intelligence. So cyber threat intelligence encompasses the field of those components. We'll go ahead and wrap them all up to understand that. But it's important to understand the difference between intelligence and information, because also you don't want to pay for information, pay the cost of intelligence when you're just getting information. The easiest check for me is just like Mike said, data, an IP address is an example. That's just what it is, it's data. If it has context with it, that's going to be an indicator. But if it answers a yes or no question, that's when it's information. Is the malware on my system? Yes or no? That's threat information. But in intelligence analysis, you're really giving an assessment. And most companies don't want to hear that. Most organizations don't normally want an assessment. We see a lot of the very mature sort of security companies doing this. We see a lot of the Fortune 500s getting to the area where their board of directors or executives want intelligence analysis and intelligence reports. So it's really, really good trend. I really like seeing that. But an intelligence analysis is not meant to give you a yes or no answer. It's a high, medium, or low confidence assessment about a situation. The instant response stuff, the driving better IDS alerts, all that kind of information, that's usually going to be data or information that you're getting at that. But in the class, we cover all three components. So as we move on, I'll turn back over to Mike here to talk about why this threat intelligence stuff even matters.
So, here we have a couple of recent headlines from WashPo, New York Times, and Brian Krebs, who spoke at last year's CTI Summit, actually. And as a brief aside, that guy is an analyst. Boy, if you haven't read his stuff, you should. He's an analyst that happens to know how to journal, not a journalist that knows how to analyze. But in any case, we are seeing more and more headlines, headline-grabbing stories. The Ukrainian thing that Rob let us off with is a perfect example of that. And the problem is there is a significant hype cycle here that's occurring, and a lot of it has to do with FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. A lot of people, the general public doesn't really understand this whole interwebs thing still. I feel like we're stuck in the 90s sometimes when I hear some of these media reports. But nevertheless, this is influencing national policy, both here in the United States as well as abroad. And we're not just talking in the Western countries either. In the course, one of the things that we discuss is the national security estimate provided by the Director of National Intelligence, Eric Cloppert, to Congress. There's an unclassified version that is available, and the first section is cyber. And of that first section, I think there are 6 or 7 different examples of assessments that were provided by industry that are used in the United States National Threat Assessment, and so that is of the level of governance as you can get, in terms of influence. So this matters because it affects how countries behave. I mean, no less than that. And it sounds like I might be overstating this, but go ahead and look at the report yourself. Look at start paying attention to national policy and things like that, and you'll see this very clearly stand out. And from that, I think supporting that, or in some cases degrading from it, is or detracting from it, pardon me, is credibility, right? Credibility is a volatile commodity. It is very easy for you to lose credibility and very difficult to gain credibility, both as an analyst, as a professional. I think all of us have certainly experienced this one point in time in our careers or another. If you've been doing this long enough, mistakes, man, they stay with you. Good work, yeah, that can hang around for a while, especially if it's got a snappy buzzword associated with it. But the reality is that if you screw something up, the implications can be profound. Whereas the implications of doing something right, of providing good analysis, tends to not stick around as long. If you want a great example that you can latch onto, look at acts of terror, right? Terrorism. We think about in the United States 9/11 or the subway bombings in the UK or Madrid. Those things hang around, but how many people are still talking about the successful bust of a terrorist cell from 4 years ago? Nobody is, right? And so it's an unfortunate reality that your successes are not going to be weighed as heavily as your failures, and so for that reason, you need to make sure that if you're doing this, you're doing it correctly. And finally, of course, threat intelligence, CTI can drive better security practices, right? CTI can be an informative or instructive component of incident response. It can gauge incident response. It can advise as to when mitigations should go into place versus when they should wait. It can advise as to the likely impact prior to a full impact assessment. It can, for example, discover entrenched threats through threat hunting and mechanisms like that. And finally, it provides a line of communication to executives and a catalyst for change within the organization. One of the phrases that the previous slide we saw, the data information intelligence progression, right? That's from probably the best document that I've ever seen from the United States military, called the Joint Publication 2-0, highly descriptive, which goes into detail about how joint operations in the United States military should handle intelligence. And one of the notions that comes out of that, or that is mentioned in there, is that intelligence flows up and command flows down, right? Intelligence flowing up, you have an opportunity to influence your decision makers, right? So I work at Lockheed Martin, and let's say Lockheed Martin is considering expanding business operations in Djibouti, right? Well, if there is a ongoing network exploitation, a large body of intrusions that are coming from Djibouti that are impacting Djibouti's neighbors, then and we are moving into and those neighbors, of course, are hacking back, if you will, and we're looking at moving into Djibouti. We're kind of walking into a war zone on the internet, if you will, and so that is something that the threat intelligence analyst can provide to decision makers and say, hey, all right, this is a business decision, but be aware that if you make this decision, then it will have it could potentially have these certain ramifications for the enterprise writ large. Now, that's a very strategic level type of assessment, but there are corollaries for both operational and tactical intelligence as well. Robert?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would agree. I would note that with the credibility thing, we've seen this happen a couple of times in the industry so far, and so that's why we're focusing on it a lot. But even from what I saw previously working in the intelligence community, I would see top secret reports go up that were completely wrong. Just because something's classified doesn't mean it's right. They're still intelligence assessments. But I would see really, really bad analytical leaks sometimes, and that entire work center would then no longer be trusted at those senior levels. And anytime reports would come from that center, they would be more or less put into the spam folder because big costly decisions had been made off of otherwise bad intelligence. So you can really, really lose credibility fast. So it's important to analyze and understand these things. And when we talk about threat intelligence, I like threat intelligence when it drives security. I like it usually at the tactical and the strategic level. The strategic being what Mike talked about with being able to influence decision makers. I think that's a great way to get the executives and board of directors involved in security and make it tell the story of what's going on instead of the ones and zeros. Speak the language of the business. I like to see that. But I also really love the tactical where folks are making everyone else's job easier. To me, a cyber threat intelligence analyst is supposed to be that catalyst. They're supposed to be a force multiplier on the team. You shouldn't be putting things in just your formats, in your indicators of compromise or IOCs, in just your formats. You're supposed to be using what folks are using and making it better. If you can take an indicator and understand how much faster your larger security team is now to respond to an incident or to make security changes based off of you gathering, processing, and injecting that indicator into the process faster, that's a great measure of success. It doesn't have to be the all-encompassing, yes, it was China, Iran, Russia, whoever. A lot of the best threat intelligence that goes on is nothing more than those people driving better response practices on security teams. So last slide on what threat intelligence can't do, and then we'll move on. More or less, threat intelligence is not your magic pixie dust. It is not going to be a replacement for your bad security practices. I have seen time and time again, otherwise great companies really invest a lot in threat intelligence or invest a lot in fancy products and teams and then go, okay, where do we start? Great, so where's your logs? Where's your network traffic? Where's your incident response data? Oh, we don't have any of that. Okay, well, you don't really have a threat intelligence team. So it's a really important thing to note about those security investments, and we'll talk about what those should really sort of look like in the next slide. But it's not a replacement for not doing what you should be doing otherwise. To me, threat intelligence is the 5% sort of secret sauce you add on the top. It takes a good security program and makes it much better. It does not take a bad security program and make it where it's defending you against all the threats, right? So it's not a magical solution. Another thing is it should not be used for predicting all the threats. I've seen a lot of jargon around this before where predictive threat intelligence and we're going to stop all the breaches before they occur. I love organizations that get into a situation where they can anticipate threats and they can try to drive security changes based off of anticipating threats. But you're not really predicting. And it's very, very, I would say be very cautious when you try to go down the predictive route. For one aspect, it's very difficult to measure. It is incredibly difficult to say, aha, because I did these actions, we predicted a threat and we made changes so that they never came after us in the first place. Well, that's going to be a hard story to tell to management. And that's not the only reason you don't do it. It costs a lot of time and resources when generally speaking you will likely have a lot of other things to deal with. So if you are one of those very, very few handful of companies in the world that have done everything correct, and you're to the position where you are responding very quickly, you've automated out most of your processes, and you don't have to worry about threats on a day-to-day basis, and you're trying to predict what's coming next, go for it. But if you're like all the rest of us mere mortals who have threats active in our networks today, who have threats that are banging on the door of the firewall, as it were, you need to be focused on driving better security practices and response practices, not on trying to predict what a nation state's going to do next, which can be very difficult to do, especially seeing how we generally group things together with Russia, China, Iran, whatever, nation states. But that's like saying the government. Well, that includes the NSA and CIA, but that also includes the post office, right? So when you talk about Russia, China, Iran, there's a lot of different divisions, a lot of different teams, a lot of different motives. 18-year-olds that come onto those teams that are brand new, that make different decisions. So trying to predict all of the human element across thousands of people and so forth can be very costly. Mike, do you have anything to add on this one?
Yeah, not to mention that the line between government and non-government in many countries outside of Western Europe and the United States is often hazy, and there's complicity to contend with and all that sort of thing. I think one thing I'll add that threat intelligence is not reading and summarizing reports. I mean, sure, that is an element of it, but really it is the fusion of what other people are seeing with what you are seeing to provide something that is relevant and actionable in the environment that you are charged with defending.
Absolutely. So let's now get into and start transitioning to what folks can expect at a class and really where we think you should be. So the first thing is trying to determine if your organization is ready for threat intelligence. And I mentioned you should have those good security practices and logging and things like that. One of the models that I created and that SANS white paper is out on it if you want to search for the sliding scale of cybersecurity, is looking at those different categories of investments that can be made. So just a very high level abstract way of noting that there's different categories of things you can do. On the left-hand side of the scale, it's all about architecture with securely implementing your architecture, maintaining and patching it, designing security in. Over on the extreme right is that offense, or those legal countermeasures and hack back. What I originally intended with this model was to note to those people that wanted to do hack back and offensive things that there was a very minimal return on investment with that. So it's very difficult to go to someone and say, you can't do this. Well, the law says I can. Okay, well, that's a bad argument. But to say, okay, you can do whatever you want, but it's entirely idiotic in terms of return on investment to go try to strike back an adversary when you have vulnerabilities all over your network. You need to handle your architecture first. So as we walk up this slide, I don't actually anticipate anybody to ever get to the offensive thing. I don't think it's ever a good return on investment for companies at all. However, when we look at where we are with intelligence, there's the aspect of generating intelligence and there's the aspect of consuming it. To get to the place where consuming and generating intelligence is really a really good return on investment for your company in terms of the tactical level is when you're already building and maintaining your networks. You put those passive defenses, basically those boxes on the network, the solutions, if you will, that are providing some sort of visibility and defense against adversaries. And then that active defense component. That's really what you've got to have as that base. You've got to have people that are monitoring for, responding to it, and learning from adversaries internal to the network. So active defense has nothing to do with hackback or honey tokens or whatever else. It's entirely about taking an active defense, monitoring, responding, and learning. And so when you have those folks, being able to inject intelligence into that process or consuming threat intelligence is really where you're going to get a really good return on investment from a threat intelligence team. More importantly, I would also note that this doesn't include sort of the strategic discussion. You could absolutely not be doing amazing in these categories and have more of a strategically focused team that's trying to gain buy-in from the executives so that they invest in all these different areas. So that's entirely okay as well. Before we move on, Mike, you want to throw anything on this one?
Yeah, I will add that there is a kind of analog to offense for corporations and organizations without legal authority to enforce the law, and that is cooperation with law enforcement. So support of offensive actions such as, hey, here is just an enormous corpus of data supporting our assertion that this particular individual or group of individuals or entity is responsible for this action against us that is illegal or that is in some way problematic diplomatically, in an international sense. So there is an essence here for offensive, which is productive, and it is important to keep that in mind as you cooperate with these enforcement bodies that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's usually a national security or some component to that folks in intelligence agencies and whoever might do those things. There's also, as Mike mentioned, the component where maybe the FBI is going to do a botnet takedown, and your intelligence that you generate might help with that. Absolutely. but in no way, in no means should companies be going back and hacking back and thinking that encourages at all a better security posture on your network. You focused on building out your architecture, those passive defenses and active defense. When you have the trained and empowered analyst, that's really when you can take a lot of advantage out of threat intelligence. So what can you expect out of the class? Well, when we built the class, our main goal was to develop peers and a common understanding around what this thing, cyber threat intelligence, is. I think when I first had a conversation with Mike about this class, one of the very first things that come up that he mentioned was, look, this class is going to get made by somebody. There is going to be some company, some individuals, anybody, it's going to come forward. It's too hot right now. Someone's going to do it. Because I'll be honest with you, when Mike and I looked at this class, it's a difficult thing to make. I've made the ICS 515 class. It stands before. It's a very straightforward class. I love it. A lot of fun. I don't have to worry about such a large community with competing different ideas on topics. Some threat intelligence teams are the girl or guy who was a firewall analyst and now has been blessed off as the threat intelligence team. Some of them are 20-year incident responders doing threat intelligence now. It's a very wide, complex class, and I sort of shied away from it at first, but Mike convinced me, saying, this is going to be done one way or another. We do not want the community to be written off by someone else, and we don't want sort of vendor jargon developing this concept, even though there are a lot of vendors doing some good work in this field. So we had to be very careful about approaching this class, but we ultimately decided that the class was definitely needed. So our expectations, really expectations from the students, I think, is when the students come in, a lot of them want to know, what is threat intelligence, when is my organization ready, and how do I use it? So a lot of that we've talked at a high level about already. But then the nitty-gritty really goes into understanding intelligence tradecraft and terminology. I mean, Intel has been around a lot longer than the word cyber, right? So this is not a new field in any regards. It's how we're applying it that's newer, and the level of focus that it has that's newer. But really, a lot of folks want to know how to analyze intrusions and make the business case for security, and ultimately piece together intrusions to identify an adversary's campaign. So multiple intrusions representing a adversary's focused effort against you or that campaign, and potentially do some attribution as well. I generally state that there's less use cases for attribution in the community than most folks realize. As an example, when you're trying to drive tactical security changes on the network and maybe patch your system, hunt for a threat on the network, etc., some people bias themselves with attribution. They say, oh, well, this is China, therefore they'll look like this. Well, you don't necessarily know that, and that's a logical fallacy, actually, and how you're biasing yourself to look at the data. So attribution can actually be a bad thing sometimes at the tactical level. But for those strategic levels and for understanding, what your board of directors wants to know in those business cases, like Mike mentioned earlier, that can definitely be useful, and so we need to be aware of that. But a lot of it also is giving that 0 to 60 approach to cyber threat intelligence, empowering folks with just as much as we can in a 5-day course, which is quite a bit actually, and showing you how to leverage indicators, how to drive security teams and incident response practices, and really how to take an approach that's not only fun but beneficial to your organization. So our approach is, this is an analysis-focused class, and here's where I want to focus on sort of that prerequisite discussion. This class is not going to have labs that are extremely technical in nature. Now, we have technical labs, and we'll talk through the course outline here in a second, where we do YARA development, IOC development, things like that. But this is not going to be a develop your own exploit kind of class or roll your own antivirus or crypto. This is not an extremely technical class. However, it is a technical class, but it's analysis driven, and it requires you to have that focus on technology. You already have to have those skills. So if you're coming into day one, and I'm going to be a little bit blunt about this, and I apologize if I offend anybody, but if you're coming in day one and you don't know what a command line looks like, it's going to be a rough class, right? It's still a 500 level class at SANS. You need to have that background skill set. But once you have that background skill set, we're going to give you that analysis approach. Because we generally get technical training all the time as analysts. A lot of technical training out there. There's really not any analysis-driven classes, and that's very important to do. So we do have a 5-day curriculum. We walk through a scenario where you start with a single indicator, because a lot of times that's what happens. You get a knock on the door, or a vendor telling you, or FBI or whoever telling you, here's this IP address, go forth and conquer. restart that scenario with that indicator. And over the 5 days, we'll go through quite a bit of material, which we'll walk here in a second. Mike, you want to add anything?
Nope, I think you're good, Robert.
Perfect. I think this is a good slide for you to jump in on, though, on the flow of the course.
Right. So we start with the most detailed ideas, right? We talk about what are some of these primitives? What is the terminology, right? The axioms. What are we assuming here, so that we can all what is the baseline that we're all operating from, and what are the abstractions that we're going to make, and how they fit together, sort of, how they complement one another in section 1, the kill chain, diamond model, things of that nature. In section 2, we get a little bit more hands-on, and we start applying these ideas and seeing how the minutia, the data, the specific strings and values and objects involved in an intrusion can be assembled together to tell a story. And then as we step further away from that, in section 3, we begin to talk about campaigns, and we're talking about how do we assemble all of this together so that we can paint a picture of a behavior of the shadow. What is the digital shadow or projection of the threat? These people, these operators on the other end of the wire that are at their computer clicking and typing and things of this nature. And we'll step further back from there and say, how can we see this intelligence at various levels of abstraction, from the tactical to the strategic? How do we understand where our organization fits into this, as Robert was saying earlier with his fantastic sliding scale. And then finally in section 5, how does this map to nation states? How do nation state strategic objectives result in the types of activities that we're seeing on our networks that led to this particular machine here getting compromised, right? And if you have the context, and you have the data from the intrusion, you have the visibility in your environment, and you have the analytical techniques when you walk away at the end of section 5, for an intrusion in your organization, you should be able to draw that line from, North Korea is vying for legitimacy on the international stage geopolitically, and this movie that Sony released was seen in their culture as an insult and really a shot across the bow, an act of war. And their response, in their perspective, was symmetric, even though for us it seems very asymmetric in our culture. And that's how this system here got compromised. And so that's going from and that's where maybe we saw this series of log entries that led us to an alert that said, hey, we've got an intrusion. And once you go all the way up and all the way down, you should be able to move back and forth in that abstraction and tell that story.
Perfect. So go ahead. So now we're going to walk through an abbreviated sort of overview of the 5 days and what you can expect in each day. You'll notice a trend here as well. And each day has 4 exercises. The last day right now has 3, but I'm about to add in 2 more, so we'll have 5. But even though it's an analysis-driven class, we obviously want to get hands-on. It's still a 500-level class. There's a lot of hands-on work in the class. So everybody can expect 4 to 5 labs on each day. Mike, why don't you give us a quick walkthrough of day 1, sort of concepts?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, we've got the terminology. How do we understand and think about indicators? What is the intelligence lifecycle? So we're going to talk about some of the fundamental principles that other intelligence disciplines use, and what those other disciplines are. The cyber kill chain and diamond model that are very instrumental in understanding the tactical level of threat intelligence. Some examples of the types of data that make good indicators. What is a good indicator? How do you know what that it looks like? And finally, what are the courses of action you can take against an adversary once you have this intelligence, this tactical intelligence that you are working with? And in this case, we're going to focus on really the collection component of the intelligence cycle, in day one? How do we pull this data in and look at it? How do we select specific types of data that are going to be the types of potential indicators, right? So this is still data, right? We talked about before, data to information to intelligence, and that's kind of the right hand there of the intelligence cycle, is the focus of day one, and it's a lot more technical in nature, because it's the more specific type of data that we're looking at.
Perfect. With day two, we're going to take that campaign that started, that intrusion that started, and those indicators that were uncovered from that initial indicator, and going to start mapping out the scenario. So day two is a big focus on walking through the scenario. Students will be working through labs on their scenario, taking the indicators themselves, looking for it, pivoting it inside the data they have. We'll also be walking through the scenario through the slides and giving examples of where the data comes from, analyzing both successful and failed intrusions, because you can learn from both of those. And also, importantly, classifying the indicators that we find along the kill chain and diamond model. So it's very useful to be able to have models to put things into buckets. Intel people generally like buckets, right? You are able to classify and categorize what you have along where it maps to what the adversary was doing, and the diamond and kill chain allow us to do that. So there's not a overly focused effort in the class on this. These are just two models that are very useful for helping us put our minds around what's going on, especially as we're in that very detailed look on day one and day two. And then we pivot, of course, into sort of that higher level as we go on and jump into day three. Mike? Did we lose you? All right. So at day three, a big focus for us is on the campaign development. A lot of the information you're going to get comes out of open source. So a significant portion of the reporting, the data, the passive DNS, who is information, malware reports, etc., a lot of that's going to come from open source intelligence and open source information. Any given intelligence agency around the world that you think has a lot of secret sauce behind the magic door, right? Quite a bit of the stuff that they do is also based off of open source. It's a very valuable resource. So on day three, it's about making that campaign development, pivoting off of indicators into different data sets, pivoting off of open source information, finding the right data, and telling that story to the team, telling that story to executives, maybe even some meaningful metrics. I know that metrics can sometimes be a little difficult for folks. I was one that did not embrace the metrics myself. I did not always see the great value in them, but meaningful metrics can absolutely help tell your story and understand where your team is evolving. And the exercises will end up focusing on tools like Maltego and VirusTotal and pivoting from that type of information. Mike, if we have you back, do you want to talk about day four?
Yep. So in day four, we're going to talk about how we share intelligence and use open source reporting to, or how do we critically evaluate open source reporting. So there's a lot of information that's out there. How do we know what's good, right? How do we share what's good? How do we digest what's good? How do we filter and assess what is valuable to us, what is applicable to us? And how do we assess the assessments of others, or how do we formulate our own assessments independently of others based on the data that they provide? That's an important aspect of threat intelligence. Is not necessarily second guessing, but validating what you're being told. We're going to talk about OpenIOC, some formats for indicator sharing, YARD development, so another very important expressive language for indicators that allows you to identify not only the data but also the context of that data. And finally, levels of threat intelligence from the tactical to the strategic. What does that look like, and what role does that play in your organization and its defense?
Absolutely. And then once we get to day five, it's all about the higher order analysis. This is, to me, a therapeutic day. And what I mean by that is my entire career I've seen very simple, and I know Mike has seen the same thing, and any intelligence analyst has seen this, very simple analytical pitfalls, logical fallacies, biases, anchoring, things like that should be identified. And they should be, excuse me, I have to sneeze here, they should be, Mike, you want to take over?
Yeah, absolutely. So the understanding how we this day we focus on thinking about thinking, right? How do we think about or how do we go about thinking about these problems and formulating our assessments, right? What is that process? We'll talk about analysis of competing hypotheses and what confidence levels are. How do we know that something is high versus low confidence? What do these things mean, right? And we're going to look at nation-state adversaries and how these nation-state adversaries, again, as I mentioned earlier, in the specific to the abstract, here is where we tie C&E or intrusions, or CNA, network attack to the objectives of nation states, or perhaps objectives of large entities. And that is really where this comes from. As I mentioned before, intelligence flows up, command flows down. It was Barack Obama that gave the order to execute the operation that assassinated Osama bin Laden, right? So where are these? What priorities are driving these intrusions? And that helps explain why our threat landscape is what it is as a given organization, and why it isn't what it isn't.
Absolutely, thanks. Sorry, I had a sneeze attack, hit mute before I do it. So with this as well, when I see folks leave day 5, a big thing for me is we're walking people through the life cycle of an analyst and showing you from one indicator all the way to the end. And you yourself as a threat intelligence analyst may only ever exist in one of the days. You may only ever be the tactical threat intelligence analyst. You may only ever be the strategic level threat intelligence. Likely you'll cover the entirety, but realistically you need to know how it all operates. And so we walk through that life cycle process, and by the end, one of the last sections is, as Mike mentioned, with these nation-state discussions, talking about what campaigns have we seen that have been attributed before to different nation-states. It's good to have the historical context of the career field you're walking into or already take part in. All right, so with that, where to find us, and as we end out, and we got a couple questions here we'll go through. So we do have, you can go to the Cyber Threat Intelligence course page there, the SANS.org/course/cyber-threat-intelligence, and you'll be able to find a listing of all of our classes coming up with the instructor that'll be teaching it and the location. I'm going to go ahead and address one of the first questions right now. We had a question saying, I see this as a great class. Let me go one above that. The course at the summit is sold out, waiting list only. What is a realistic expectation of someone on the waiting list actually getting in? Any chances increasing the number of available seats? So the waiting list can be useful. I've seen a number of people get on the waiting list before. However, with this class, I will state that it sells out pretty quickly. So there's a lot of folks looking to do threat intel, a lot of folks in this field right now. We're seeing this class sell out faster than normal. And I do not hold a high level of confidence that you would get in on a wait list just because of the number of people trying to come. If I would say still sign up to try, but you might want to look at the future offerings and try to sign up for there as well. So now I'm going to flip it over and start answering the questions. I always like to end it on a lighthearted note as well. We have to remember, no matter how many of us have done this or what we'll be doing it for how long and so forth, that we really need to shy away from the term expert. A lot of us are just learning, regardless of how long you've been doing it for, and we're in a community, and it's all about learning from each other and in each other's unique experiences. So I will start off with the questions here, and Mike, I'll throw you some as well. So in like 30 seconds, Mike, here's the first question for you. I see this as a great class on how to perform CTI. What resources would you recommend for building a corporate CTI team from the ground up?
What resources would you recommend in building a CTI team from the ground up? Well, the first thing that I would say is, I would follow the intelligence life cycle, right? Collection. Do you have access? Do you have the ability to operate and collect the data that you need, and then processing and exploitation? Do you have the ability to affect change, right? And from that, of course, analysis. Do you have the right people to pull all of that information together and formulate intelligence? And then, of course, and planning side, can this make it all the way up to executive decision makers so that they can take this and factor it into the strategic business decisions that they have to make in order to do their jobs effectively. And then finally, of course, closing the loop, are those executives going to provide the resources necessary to continue operating and continue the the level of capabilities necessary in order as the business environment changes, as the customer landscape changes, as the threat landscape changes, to continue to operate at a high level of I guess, success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would note, for those of you that are looking into, and I don't mean to just do plugs here, but for those of you that are looking into figuring out how others are doing it, the CTI Summit is actually a really good opportunity for that. It's great to come here from the presenters, but also hearing from the other people and just, hallway con, if you will, figuring out what others are doing is very useful. This question has come up a couple times, though, so it's a really good one in class that has come up. So what I'm actually doing, what Mike and I are doing, is we're going to include a new little addendum section sort of at the end about how do you sort of, what should you be looking for if you are the single person that's been blessed off to be the CTI team. How do you get started? So we'll be including that in the class as well. So the next one is does the class address intelligence sharing resources such as Stix, Taxi, and Cybox? Absolutely. On day 4, we go through those as well as tools like MISP and going through the different sharing mechanisms to make sure that whether it's at a more tactical or operational level, that you have the ability to understand the tools that are in the environments that are being used. I do want to put a caveat on that. This isn't a tool class. We're not. It's not a 5-day class on Stix as an example, right? But do we address it? Absolutely. To show some of the pitfalls, some of the benefits. It's usually how we address individual tools and standards. We get a lot of hands-on though with OpenIOC and Yara. But there are exercises for things like this. What do you recommend for organizations that are not ready for CTI but management has mandated the implementation of a CTI program? I would say find your mechanism to increase the security awareness and understand what you do need to have. So I would take a more strategic role at that point. And I would look to identify abilities to tell the story, the security story, in the language of the organization in such a way that the investments can be made to build out the security program that's needed. So if you've got a really high functioning organization, I would look to CTI being more tactical and then going towards strategic. If you don't have the things in place that you think you do, I would sort of start on the strategic side and go down. Let's see, next question. So a couple of these are easy ones, so I'll answer a couple at the same time. Will there be a certification, and will there be on-demand, and another one on the certification? So yes, there's going to be a certification. The process at SANS usually takes about a year once we, the course authors, say that we're ready, because there's a lot of sort of codifying of things that go into place when that occurs. We're getting ready to go ahead and pull that trigger and say, yep, we're good to go, but expect the certification about a year out, in other words, because we want to make sure that Mike and I get the course perfect. There's a lot of, every time we teach it, there's new things we want to add in, and we don't want to have a more static certification before we've really fleshed out the class. I think we just launched it earlier this year, so yes, it's coming, and yes, on-demand will also be available. We'll be recording in the spring and making that available to folks.
Another thing, Robert, I'd like to add to that very briefly is this is new. I mean, this is really new. We're still kind of feeling our way through it, all of us, even those of us who've been doing it for a while. And I think the models are still emerging and ideas are still evolving at a very rapid pace, and we certainly don't want to put the cart before the horse and call someone certified before we even know what the entirety of the domain looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very good point. Is certifications are really normally used as a base level of knowledge, but they carry weight, carry a lot of weight actually. And having GIAC and SANS get behind a cert is a big deal. So I think the answer is yes, it's coming. It'll probably be about a year, but we are really taking a strong approach to getting it right because there's a lot of impact to getting it wrong. And we want the cert to mean something. So the last question that we'll get time for, let's see, about the prerequisites. Would you consider prerequisite knowledge, experience, or SANS training prior to taking this class? And then another question specifically about what are the strict prerequisites. The sort of blunt, honest answer is if you know that you're a technical person and that you're ready for an analysis level class, that's fine. But realistically, we have set prerequisites stating that you need to have taken a SANS course before, specifically like a forensics course, like 508, 572, 610, any of those more hands-on courses, so that you have the technical experience needed. And then we come and sort of add, we see this class in a lot of ways like a capstone, but not really a capstone in the sense that you have to have all the experience. It's just you need to bring something with you. You need to have some technical experience coming into the class. But the truthful answer is, if you're a 20-year incident responder, no, I don't need you to take a Windows forensics class before you show up, right? But it's very helpful. So you're going to have to judge for yourself. But we have prerequisites that are very strict that we put on the website. We just allow folks to come to the class, regardless if you sort of measured yourself. And then the last question is, what about Security 504? Is that part of the prereq? It's one you can use, absolutely. So generally, what we put on the website is Forensics 508, Forensics 572, Forensics 610 are some of the best ones, and then Memory Forensics and so forth would be great, but 504 can absolutely substitute. So with that, we are out of time. I appreciate everyone who showed up and attends today. Mike and I definitely enjoyed it. I think one of the things you should take as a takeaway is we have a very nuanced approach. We want to give you the 0 to 60 approach and make you an empowered analyst and a great resource to your organization. But we're going to tell you how it is. And we're not going to pretend that threat intelligence is the cure for everything. So if you want that measured, sort of nuanced approach and to help empower yourself and your organization, feel free to join us in the class. We look forward to having you. With that, have a great day.
Thank you so much, Robert and Mike, for your great presentation and for bringing this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, you can visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.